We're here today in the home of Lyndall and Kay Browning, and we're doing a short interview so that we can learn something about Lyndall and his wife and the work they've done here in the Middle East. We're in his home in Jerusalem. So Lyndall, it's nice to be with you. We went to seminary back in the 70s, so we've known each other a long time. But perhaps you could tell our listening audience, viewing audience, a little bit about yourself and Kay. Sadly, Kay's not with us this evening,
right. Mm-hmm.
But perhaps you can tell us about yourself and Kay and
Sure.
what brought you to Jerusalem.
Sure. Well, we actually 33 years ago this summer we came to the Middle East, and we went to Amman, Jordan, where we studied Arabic and lived there, and we were involved in the church there in Jordan for 2 years. And then the church reassigned us after language school. After Arabic language school, we were assigned to Nazareth, where we lived in Nazareth for 7 years. We had 2 daughters when we first came to the Middle East. They were, I think, ages 4 and a year and a half. And while we were in Jordan, the last month we were in Jordan, my wife gave birth to our 3rd daughter. And then when we moved to Nazareth, we had our son. He likes to tell everyone he's a real Nazarene because he was born in Nazareth. But anyway, now the children are grown, but they grew up here. They basically spent their early childhood years in Nazareth, where we were for 7 years. And then we moved to Bethlehem area. And we lived in Bethlehem for about 7 years. And that was during the first Intifada, the first uprising, the Palestinian uprising. And that was a pretty challenging time. It was during also during the first Iraqi war, and when the Scud missiles were coming into Israel, and that was kind of a difficult time. But it was a time where we intentionally went to live in Bethlehem because we felt like we could be of more service to the people there, the Palestinians who were there and who were having a hard time getting into Jerusalem and finding work and all of that. So we moved out there, loved living out there. And then in about 1997, we moved to Jerusalem. My responsibilities had expanded from being just a pastor in Nazareth to being a district superintendent to being the field, or I think it was called a mission director at first, and then a field director. And I took more responsibility into Lebanon and Syria and Jordan at that time. We were just starting to plant some house churches in Egypt, and so we had those areas were under my responsibility. And then in 92 or 93, when I became field director, we started looking into getting into some new areas. And so now we have work in Lebanon and Syria, Jordan, here in Israel in the Palestinian area. And also in Turkey, we have some house groups. And in Iraq, we have a couple of organized churches. We have some house groups in Egypt. And then in some of the creative access countries in the Persian Gulf, we have some house groups that are meeting. And the Lord's really been moving, especially these last 10 years. My real focus has been, and I felt this was my original calling, or the intention when I came to the field, was to work with indigenous leadership and to plant indigenous churches, because we missionaries were pastoring churches, and I said, I felt strongly this shouldn't be. I felt like we should be developing the national church and developing indigenous leadership. And so we restarted our Bible college. Actually, it had been closed due to a lot of tension in Beirut and in Lebanon in the late 60s. And it had been closed. And so from 1969 to 85, we had no pastoral training program at all. We did have a couple of students that went to European Nazarene College in Boozingen. We had one young man that went to formerly BINC, or the British Isles Nazarene College, back in the early or late 70s. And then we reopened basically the Nazareth Church. We had a youth revival and a youth movement, and they wanted to train. And so we actually opened it up on Monday nights and Tuesday mornings for about 4 hours each day and taught, I think there were 4 different classes that we were teaching. I was teaching a couple, and Kay was teaching English, and then we had a couple of other people helping us. But that was the start of our Bible college. And then our pastors today were all products, or they were all fruit from that time. Like Pastor Nazar, who's our pastor in Nazareth, and Pastor Nabil, who is the director, Dr. Nabil Samara, who is at the Galilee Bible College, and also one of our ordained ministers. And then Boutros also did some training with us. So, but we restarted the Bible college there, and then it expanded that summer into Cyprus, where we were able to include the Jordanians and also the Egyptians. So we were privileged to raise all 4 of our children here in the Middle East. They love the Middle East. One of our daughters is back here, speaks fluent Hebrew and Arabic, but she is the guidance counselor at the International School. The other kids, one of our daughters is a missionary for the Church of the Nazarene in France, and she and her husband, and that's where my wife is right now. We just had our fifth grandchild last week. They're coming so fast, it's hard for me to keep track. So our fifth grandchild, and she is there helping my daughter out for a few more days. They have two other children. And then our son is in California, and then another daughter. In fact, the other daughter is married to a young man who they grew up with here, and his parents are Baptist missionaries still, and he grew up in Gaza. And so this is home, and the kids, they long to, and they still believe that this is home. But the church has grown tremendously. We now have about 35 churches, and all of them are pastored or led. Either home groups or organized churches are led by indigenous leadership. The only church that we have a non-Arab working pastoring in is the church here in Jerusalem, and that is Tim Evans. Some of you may know him from Dublin, from Ireland, and he was the Nazarene youth representative for our region for several years. And he came to just fill in for a couple months and has ended up being here for about a year and a half. And we're hoping will stay a long time. He's doing a great job. And our church in Jerusalem has become more of an international, with some Arabs, some Israelis, and several expats that are a part of the service. But it's a very nice community that's developing. So we're intentionally training leaders all over the area and planning new churches. It seems like one of the two really major changes that I've seen in 33 years is when we first came, I didn't sense that any of our Arab pastors especially, and we only had a few, but even our lay people that were doing leadership, any of them were concerned about their Muslim neighbors. And now all of our pastors are trying to have ministry among Muslims and trying to disciple Muslims and working, especially in the creative access countries, doing missionary work among Muslims. Also, Compassionate Ministries is a strong ministry, especially in those communities of the refugees, like in Jordan and in Syria and in Lebanon. But and another change is the change in indigenous leadership, and the also going from having to have the big, huge building, which they all still like to have, but going to also it's being acceptable now to have house churches. And that's really the only way we're going to be able to reach into our neighbor community or into the Muslim community, is to do it through house churches, because they put their lives in danger, also put the church in danger. A lot of times if they're going to the church, and their families, their neighbors may see this and may cause some problems. So, but our work in Iraq, our work in Jordan, and right now Syria is a major prayer request. We don't really know what's going on. Inside the work there, we have a couple of our pastors that have written out, and first they were saying, oh, nothing's really happening, it's just all media. But now they're writing and saying it's really desperate, and they really need a lot of prayer, and there are a lot of needs. But the local church there is trying to meet some of those needs, and maybe through Compassionate Ministries we'll be hearing more about how we can help when things settle down a little bit, because I know there have been a lot of homes that have been destroyed, a lot of people without even clothing and bedding and things like this. So we do want to be ready with Compassionate Ministries when we're able to do it. But right now we're not able to do it. It's also been really interesting to see our national church has started getting into Compassionate Ministries. Syria is a good example, in Jordan also, when the Iraqi war, the wars started, and so many thousands, even millions of refugees came into Syria and Jordan. The local churches there took the initiative to house them, to bring them in, and we have people now, really Iraqi refugees, that have gone on from all over the world that have come to the Lord and come to the church through our work in Jordan and Syria. One really interesting story, and this is kind of just a quick illustration about how our local churches are involved. There was a couple from Sudan, a family from Sudan, from Darfur refugee camp, and they were Muslims, they were religious Muslims. And they came to Jordan, and she made a connection between the Nazarene school and the Nazarene church, which are a few blocks apart, but she made that connection, and she went to the pastor and asked the pastor if they were connected, and he said, yes, we are. And she said, we can't get our children into the Jordanian school. Is there any way we can get the children into the Nazarene school? And he said, well, I need to tell you, it's a Christian school, it's our church school, but we have Muslim children. And she said, that's not a problem, I just want my children to have education. And there were 3 children, 2 boys and a girl. Well, anyway, the Pastor Khalil called Rod Green, who is our Compassionate Ministries director, and he said, I will guarantee that I can get 50% for the children's tuition. Well, Khalil said, that's great, but they don't have anything. They've come with basically across the desert. And so Rod called him back a few minutes later and said, I've got 90% of it raised right now. He called other organizations. And Khalil said, that's great, the local church will help with the other 10%. So the 3 children started going to school and excelled. And the family started going to church. I happened to be there in the service when the lady took her scarf off, and the Muslim lady, and was baptized. It was really a thrilling service. Gave her testimony about how the church had loved her, and the church had saw the needs of her children and helped out. And anyway, Rod got to be real close to the boys. And when they get to grade 10, they have to go on to another school because we only go up through grade 10. We have, by the way, along with the 35 churches, we have 4 schools, elementary schools, that go up to about grade 8 to 10. And so the boys got to be in 9th and 10th grade, and we're going to have to move on. And Rod helped them to get scholarships to go to some other good Christian schools. And their English was so good that he used them to translate for the work and witness teams. And last summer, a work and witness team from Kansas City, Missouri area, they fell in love with this family, and the boys translated for them. And the boys just almost lived with them for the 2 weeks they were there. Well, they told them, they said, why don't you come to Mid-American Nazarene University? It's right near us, and you can maybe stay with us, or anyway, we can help take care of you. And well, the family, thought that was just a real dream. Here they came from Darfur refugee camp. They fled, and with nothing. And anyway, the family, about 2 weeks after the team left, 2 or 3 weeks later, the family found out they were going to be repatriated from Jordan to the U.S. And they were going to be going to Kentucky. Where in Kentucky, I don't know. But because I don't think there's a large Arab population or Sudanese population there. But anyway, they were going there. Well, one of the men on this team had some connections with the UN, and he did some calling and asked if there was any possibility that this family could be in the Kansas City area, or Missouri, or Kansas, or near. And it so happened that they were able to be moved, and they lived about 2 blocks away from the Church of the Nazarene there that they had ministered to his family when they were there in Jordan. So that's kind of a neat story of just the church reaching out through some compassionate ministries, through our schools, our child development centers, and through the church. And it was just really thrilling. But I really praise the Lord. It's been an exciting adventure being here for 33 years. And when we face, the next few years and possible retirement, and it feels good that we have so many wonderful leaders in our churches. The indigenous leadership is so good, and they're going to do it. I really feel like, I used to think that Jesus didn't really know what he was talking about when he said, you're going to go and do greater things than I did, to his disciples. I feel exactly what he was saying to them, because these pastors, that some of them, I've seen them come to the Lord, and we've been a part of their training and just part of their lives for so many years. They're going to do much, much more than I ever thought I could ever do. So it's really neat to think that we're passing on to some wonderful people. And this movement in the Middle East is not going to be stopped. And it's not going to be controlled. I tell someone I feel like I've completely lost control. And it's a good feeling, because you can't control the movement of God, which is really good. So we thank you for your prayers. As I said, Syria is an urgent prayer request. Also, pray for our schools, because we have some great children. Pray for our leadership development and our Bible college. We're in the middle of electing a new president, and our former president passed away about 4 years ago, and everybody's really missed him. It's been difficult for us to find someone, but we're in the midst of trying to do that now. But God's going to lead us to that. So thank you for your interest in all of us in the Middle East. I tell people from the States, when we show slides or when we show pictures, when we talk about the people of the Middle East, just like you pray for your family that goes off to Iraq or to Afghanistan or someplace to war, you pray for them because you have family there now. Well, just think of these people here in the Middle East as your family, and so I would say to you, keep praying for them because you have family here. So thanks for being a part of our lives.
Thank you. Thank you.